Hey, welcome back. So today, just gonna do a bit of a deck update. So if you've been paying attention to the meta and the ban list and everything, today Wizard has banned a couple cards in Historic, which is cool. You know, it changes up the format a little bit and um, allows us to experiment more with decks and diversify rather than just kind of sticking with the same thing. Seeing the same cards over and over. So I'm gonna do just a small change to the my Esper deck since I think that ban list made the most impact on it. So gonna kind of tell you what cards I try to replace things with and what we're gonna try out, and we'll go from there. So as you know, they banned both Brainstorm and T-Bolt's Trickery, which doesn't really make an impact too much per se. T-Bolt's Trickery definitely in best of one. That deck was with what cards you had in this particular format. Couldn't really answer that deck that consistently, and especially with Throw of Chaos. That deck's a little bit more consistent than the former T-Bolt Trickery, and then they just completely removed that card, which is fine. I mean, I thought that deck was kind of boring to play against, and it was just kind of a high roller deck. You know, you draw your cards you needed, great. You know, you win the game turn one, turn two, whatever. So it's pretty boring to play against, and would be pretty boring to play with. Um, and they banned Brainstorm. That's been gone from for I don't know, a couple months now. So that doesn't really change much. And, once they suspend a card, it's effectively banned. So the main card that they got rid of or suspended, I guess, was Memory Lapse, and of course, that card was seen in pretty much every blue deck that could be seen in. Could be, Mono Brew aggro, Demir aggro, all the control decks, Jeskai, Esper, Azorius, you name it. It probably was playing Memory Lapse. And Memory Lapse, I would say, is better than Counterspell. They printed Counterspell, but they banned Counterspell almost immediately when Strixhaven came out or whatever. But they allowed memory lapse in the format, which was really interesting. Um, I think their reasoning is that you could, instead of hard countering a spell, you give your opponent a chance to get that spell back and recast it. It was just kind of a short delay. It didn't really answer anything per se. It just stalled them for a turn, which in theory is a lot weaker than hard countering a spell. But they also forget that there's costs to be played in this game. So you're paying 5 manas to cast a spell. All of a sudden, it goes back on top of your deck. You're redrawing the same card, and you have to reinvest that 5 mana. So you're basically set back a turn. Versus if, let's say, you play counter spell, you hard counter a 5 mana spell. Cool, it goes to the graveyard. You next turn you have something else to do. You maybe draw a different card. You have something else in your hand that you can invest your mana into, and you don't have to commit to trying to reinvest that mana into that card that you just played that got countered by memory lapse. So, in my opinion, I think memory lapse is a lot better than counterspell, and it's also the cost is more generic. Colorless and a blue is a lot easier to cast on basically any mana build you have. Where like counterspell, you definitely need a mana base that's more dedicated to blue, especially when you're playing in a format like historic where mana fixing is a lot more difficult. Um, I think counterspell would have been okay in this format. It's a powerful card, but I think it's less generic, I guess. So you need a more dedicated land base to play it. Same thing with like Archmage Charm. Archmage Charm is definitely a great card. It's a powerful card. Really good in modern, but in historic, I think it can exist just fine because of its heavy mana cost. Triple blue in a format where you can barely even sometimes do just 3 colors safely is it's fine. You don't have to fetch lands to fix it. You don't have to filter lands. You don't have a lot of tools to fix your mana. So I think Archmage Charm Counterspell would have been perfectly fine here. So moving forward, As you can see, I'm trying out a couple different cards in my deck. Trying out Faithful Absence. This card saw a little bit play in Modern. I don't know how great it's gonna be or how good it's gonna be, but I mean overall, just looking at the card, it's pretty good. In Modern, it's probably better because you give your opponent a chance to draw a card, but because the format is so kind of fast, most of the time they're not gonna have time to spend 2 mana to draw one card. Um, versus the card I was using before, Baleful Mastery, it requires a bit more of a setup, but it's also you can spend 4 mana to not let your opponent draw at all, or if the setup is if you have Narset on board, it's a 2 mana exile removal spell, which is good. Um, that brings me to my other point that this card doesn't exile. In historic, there's not too many cards that you need to exile per se. There's not many indestructible. I don't think there's any indestructible planeswalkers, so you don't have to worry about that. Indestructible creatures are a little bit more harder to come by. There are a few, but they're generally limited to aggro decks, and something like maybe like an Ulamog, but you rarely see those cards in play anyways. So I think just destroying the creature is just fine. Granted, the exile part of the effect also hits the stuff that does things when it dies, and you don't want your opponent to reoccur it with some sort of reanimation. But in historic we don't really have any real big reanimator decks per se, so I think just destroying it is fine. Giving your opponent a clue token, sure. In my deck here, if I have Narset out, they're never going to really pop their clue token unless they use artifacts specifically or artifact synergy. Then this card might be a little worse. But I don't think I played against any real big artifact synergy. There's no affinity decks in historic here, so I think we're okay with that. It might suck against a cat deck or something like that, or a sacrifice deck, aristocrat, where they can just sack this card and deal damage and do things to you. But outside of that, I think Faithful Absentee, we're gonna try it out, see how it works. It's a low mana investment. It's just one white and one generic. So see how that goes. To make up for the loss of some of our counter spells, I'm gonna try out two Dovin's Veto in the main. I was siding this card, and side card, it's great. In the main, I'm not too sure. I think maybe it's even better to play just a regular Negate over Dovin's Veto, simply because Negate is just a generic blue in a colorless. Um, but I think with my mana base, I should be able to support this card. We'll see. We'll have to test it out. This is kind of all just theory. Um, I would say Drowning Lock would probably be the best counter spell per se in this format. At least at 2 mana at least, because it doubles up as a removal and doubles up as countering. In this deck, I think the reason I'm not playing more than two at the moment, because I don't think I can support this card as well. Because I do want hard counters in this deck. We'll get that a little bit later, which is why I'm playing the Dovin's Veto as a hard counter, because I do have a lot of creature removal, so the removal part of this card doesn't really play too much of too much such a big part in my strategy here, because I want to use this card to counter rather than using it as removal. But because of how slow historic is, it's sometimes kind of hard to counter a certain spell, like a very important spell, when your opponent's graveyard has only got like 2 cards in it. It's not gonna really, it's just gonna sit in your hand. Yeah, I'm playing the 4 Thought Seizes, and I even thought about, because of losing the memory lapse, maybe playing more like Inquisitions into the deck, stuff like that. But if we do that, then our top decks are gonna be kind of garbage. Because if you play like 6 Thought Seizes or 6 hand trap removal against in your first game, you might not have a good time. Unless you're always going second, like whack 8 or whatever in Modern, where they play a bunch of dot seizes and Inquisition, and they're always going second, so they always up a card and they're always getting rid of your good cards. This deck is more of a control deck. It's not a whack 8 sort of type of deck, so I'm not gonna really play too much more um, hands disruption and clog up my hand when I'm top decking stuff like this. And this is not a good top deck, obviously. Um, so I'm gonna try to limit it to 4. Try to use the removal spells to put stuff in my opponent's graveyard. Like Fatal, Absentee, Veto, and then try to make this card a little bit better during the mid game. But we'll see. I mean, I might bump it up to 2, or sorry, to 3. Probably not 4. I don't think I can support 4 in this deck. And also, especially when I side deck, I might have to actually take it out of the deck because I do side a bunch of graveyard hate, and that kind of conflicts with Drown and Lock. So we'll see. Next card, we're gonna bump Archmage Charms to 4, and I know I've spoke about this card before, where with my particular mana base, it's a little difficult to support because we are playing 3 colors and we don't have mana fixing. So Archmage Charm sometimes is very difficult to cast, but it's still a really good card, and I think I'd rather see it than not see it, and being able to cast it when I need to. It's also going to be our best counter spell in this deck now. I think with the removal of Memory Lapse, I think we have to play the 4 charms now. It's the best 3 mana counter spell. I'd say the most utility wise and everything. It's just that great. So I think playing 4 is not going to be an issue. It might clog up our hand a little bit, but hopefully our Search for Escanta is going to try to fix our draws and try to fix our mana. So hopefully that will work well together. Narset, I think maybe I can drop her down to 2. I don't think I really need 3. But I mean, I still like her. We'll see. We'll keep her at 3 for now and test play and see if she is more dead weight than not. Might just go ahead and remove her. Obviously, I would rather play like the 3 mana Teferi in this deck if I could, but that's an option. So we'll just stick with 3 Narsets for now. I think the problem with triple Narset and 4 Archmages is we have a lot of 3 mana cards to cast. Why I say that is because of Shark Typhoon. Shark Typhoon, you at least want to cast it on 3 mana to get that Shark token, to get a little bit more value out of it. You oftentimes don't discard it you don't cycle it for 2. Unless you're really you really need a land or something, or you're really digging for something. But I think with Shark Typhoon here and this, you have 11 3 mana cards to play, and that might be quite a lot. And so there is a reason to cut this down, or cut one of the sharks down, and I'll kind of talk about that in a bit here. Day of Judgment, same thing. You can play Wrath of God if you have that. And I don't want to spend my wild cards on Wrath of God, so I had more mythic cards, so I just made Day of Judgment. And the Japanese alt art is pretty neat. Trying out Languish rather than Extinction Event, because Extinction Event was great, but I still needed it to hit the whole board. And sometimes it couldn't do that. For most creatures that are small with indestructible, which is that like a few creatures in here, they're small and they're indestructible, or they have other creatures that give other things indestructible, like Weenie Whites and stuff like that. Then Languish serves the same purpose as Extinction Event. It gets rid of the indestructible stuff, and most creatures that we want to kill are going to be 4 toughness and less anyways. So I think Languish is going to be fine. It's a little bit harder to cast. I mean, it's 2 blacks, 2 black mana rather than 1 black and 3 generic, but that's fine. It does lack a little bit in removing it completely from the game. So if you hit like your opponent, if they have a Loris, they can always bring it back. So it's a little bit weaker than Extinction Event in that sense, but I think just clearing your opponent's board and hitting everything is better than just hitting half of their board and having half of it exiled. So we'll try out Languish and see how that goes. The Planeswalker lineup's still the same. Haven't really found anything else that works as well, I guess. Um, and so I'm just gonna keep it the same here. With Shark Typhoon, I added a fourth copy, um, since to kind of make up for the loss of memory lapse. I mean, it's a great card, almost always um, playable, usable, um, and so I think four copies will allow us to use it more leisurely, to like spend 2 mana just to cycle it rather than having to wait till turn 3 to um, make a token out of it. I was deciding and maybe debating on playing like Consider or Opt in the deck to kind of speed it up a little bit more and maybe cut down some lands and stuff like that. But with the inclusion of Archmage's Charm to 4, I think I'm going to keep the mana base the same or change it a little bit to try to support the Archmage's Charm. So I don't think I'll be cutting my mana base down to any less than 24 24 land. I think I'm playing 25 right now. It's kind of like in the middle. But this deck may need 26, but I think 25 is fine, especially with the sharks and the searches. We should be able to hit our third land consistently for the blue to be able to consistently play this on turn 3 if necessary. If we can't play this on turn 3, we can play turn shark, or we can play Narset, which is the same idea. It's a little bit of redundancy, I guess. But these two cards, they kind of serve the same purpose. Like I mentioned, you want to be drawing cards rather than hard countering with this card. Um, but with the loss of memory lapse, we might be having to use Archbase Charms to counter cards more than to draw cards. So I guess in that sense, Narset's a little bit better because then we can leave her on the board, and she can be the one that's drawing us cards, and we can save the Archmage Charms to use that to hard counter instead. If necessary, we can throw in other counterspell cards. We throw in was it Foretell, or was it Saw It Coming? I just didn't like Saw It Coming because I didn't like just spending 2 mana to kind of put the card in the Foretell, because that just kind of just broadcasts your opponent, what you have there anyways, and then you're tapped out anyway, so like your opponent knows, oh, their turn 2 or turn 3, whatever, they're safe to do whatever they want, because you're tapped out and you have Saw It, and they know that you have a Saw It coming, and so they might be able to play around it a little bit better. So that's just my idea, or my reason why I'm not really playing um, that particular card. You could, I guess, play Censor. Censor was another card I thought about adding to this deck, since it kind of does the same thing. It counters a card for unless your opponent can pay for it, which works really great early game, and late game you can just cycle it to draw a card and get where you need to be. I guess the only issue is I don't really care for dumping cards and into my graveyard, which in this particular deck, because there's nothing in this deck that can really make use of my graveyard outside of Search for Ascanta, where we can kind of turbo it out and flip it. Um, so like I guess I just didn't want to sit there and spend mana drawing cards, but that's more of the the draw goal style of playing this particular deck. Um, where like this deck, I'm kind of doing like a hybrid of draw go and tapping out to play certain things. This format's a little different. It's a little bit slower than modern. So in modern, I think doing the draw go sort of style is better. So you can keep your mana always open and prepare yourself to counter your opponent's stuff or play removal or whatever, um, until it's safe to drop your planeswalker. In here, I think you can just card cast for planeswalker. And most of the time, it's okay. Like they aren't gonna really be leaving the board the next turn after that, or whatever. But we'll have to see. In terms of the side deck, the only 2 cards I took out the Dolan's Video, threw it into my main deck, and then I added Gold Blank and another Mystical Dispute. So for additional counters, since This especially works well in against every, I guess, um, blue deck control matchup. So yeah, might as well bump it up since we lost the memory lapse. Might as well have an extra counter spell in the side, and go blank for extra graveyard hate and some additional hands disruption. Um, Good card overall. I don't think I need more than the one of, but that might change. So okay, well that's basically it. Oh, I guess in terms of mana base, it's pretty much the same. I'm only playing two swamps to get out the swamp early enough to play the Thoughtseize. And additionally, it will help me fatal passage into a swamp so that I can fatal push something if I needed to. So that's why I'm playing the two swamp. But I think depending on how my next couple of games go, I might swap the swamp out to another island, play triple island and just one swamp, just so we can better support Archmage's Charm. But well, that's remain to be seen. So that's it for my deck update on my Esper deck, and we'll probably be playing a couple of best of threes coming up, and just to test it out and see how that goes. Always hope you guys enjoy. See you next time.